Hello, everyone. I am Sophie. I'm a journalist with Le Monde, and I'm delighted to welcome you until 7 p.m. for this roundtable dedicated to the acceleration of inequalities, a time bomb. So you probably remember the book by Thomas Piketty, Capital at the 21st Century, which was a worldwide bestseller. It was published in 2013. Now it's over 10 years down the road, and we're still talking about the topic, and we haven't really felt like we found the right solutions. So in order to discuss this statement and the consequences that it represents, this feeling of rising inequalities, we have a very rich panel with us tonight. This roundtable was prepared by Philippe TRAINAR, who's an economist with the Cercle des économistes, and will give us the landscape of the situation, his own way of doing it. And then to discuss it, we'll be with Jean-François COPÉ, who you know very well, who's the mayor of Meaux in France, who's also the president-delegate of the foundation founded by Jean-Pierre Raffarin, which is now in charge of the project for the Les Républicains, the French right-wing party. We're also with Heikki HIILAMO. Heikki is coming from the University of Finland for the 8th year in a row in the ranking of the countries by, well, in terms of well-being. Finland is the #1 in the world, so obviously the solutions coming from Finland are very interesting for us. He wrote a very good book on a concept that is called the participation share, which is a way of breaking down what the basic income, which is a wage that is given to everyone. Well, he'll explain to you better than I do, and it's in free access, the book, if you want to read it, but it's in English only. Then we have Ndidi NWUNELI from Washington. She's at the same time Nigerian and American. She's at the head of an NGO called One Campaign. She's worked for McKinsey. She worked for the Foundation Forbes. She worked for several NGOs. And she's now developing an advocacy to find concrete solutions to the questions of inequalities and poverty, and she'll give us her testimony. And last, we have Trisha SHETTY, who's the founder of the NGO SheSays. Trisha was born in Mumbai. I really recommend you to watch her TED Talk on sexual abuse on children, and in particular on young girls, which is very moving. Trisha founded this NGO to protect women and to give them the voice. She's very active as well within the Paris Forum on Peace in the world, and she works on the questions of democracy and human rights in Paris for the last 4 years. So I'm going to give the floor without further ado to Philippe TRAINAR. Thank you, Sophie. Inequalities rising, a time bomb. And I would like to add immediately, watch out, because watch out to what we're saying. What are we talking about? We're talking about inequalities. Inequalities are in a plural form. Watch out means that we have to be careful that when there's inequalities of wage, that leads to inequalities of health, of leisure. It all comes from the basic inequality, which is inequalities of money and wage. If you have a strong health system, which is inclusive, you still find the same inequalities, even if it's coming in a different form. Second point, the inequalities have several forms, and that's what makes it interesting. A geographic dimension. Are things happening the same way in Africa than in France or in the US and in the world? Second, we need to make a distinction. The distinction is rarely made. The inequalities before tax and after tax, and after all the services and all the benefits you receive from your taxes. So then you also have the inequalities by status. So here comes the gender issue, but also TRAINAR in 2000, how is he going to evolve his wage in 2020 compared to another household that has a lower income or a higher income? So that's what's interesting to know. A few conclusions, just to show you that the conclusions are not another fact, sure fact, in the world, inequalities have dropped between 1990 to 2020. We don't have any numbers after 2019, in fact. So within the countries, since 1999 until 2019, it's the stability of inequalities among countries. After 2019, watch out with the numbers you receive because they are extremely weak. If I talk about the United States, the place where inequalities really exploded, we have an explosion of inequalities of gross wage, but also of net wage on the period 1990-2022, which is not well known, but now is well documented. And if I take the United States in terms of portfolio, real estate portfolio, we have a big explosion of inequalities there as well. But watch out, like in France, 50% is explaining by aging, which is because you live longer, you accumulate capital for longer period of time. So for France, we have between 1990 and 2000 the stability of the inequalities, and after 2000 the inequalities are dropping up until 2019. And by cohorts, if we look at the cohorts, the drop of the inequalities is even bigger. Like somebody who starts in 2000 ends up relatively better off with a better evolution than a higher income of later on. So at the end of the day, this is a very interesting scenario. And watch out when you talk about inequalities. Tell us about which inequalities we're talking about. So a time bomb, what can we do? First of all, we need to be careful of the data that we're using and the words we're using as well. There's not one inequality, there's several inequalities. And watch out as well about the scientific character of what you, for example, the gross income are increasing, but it may not be the case for your net income. So you need to really clarify what you're talking about. And you also need to consider the whole of everything. So the action that is most fundamental, that contributes the most to reducing the inequalities is education, and a quality education, not any education. So there's a whole thinking to be done on that to avoid the time bomb. So there's an aspect of inequalities that can be linked to political, economic domination. So for monopoly or monopolistic reasons, but that is up to the policy of competition. So the ways to avoid this time bomb are the same means, education, policies, competition law, and the advice for all the politicians, maybe Jean-François, when you think about it, we have to be very clear on the goal that we're pursuing to make sure that we don't have a religious debate, but a real debate, social debate. Thank you, Philippe. So you haven't said the word taxes, which is a big issue in France because we've had a debate in Parliament on the Zoukmen tax that would be about taxing the highest fortunes. And we have a debate on the budget that is going to be tricky. So who must pay for the efforts made to reduce the debts? And I would like to ask you a question, Jean-François COPÉ. If the inequalities are not so bad, why are we talking about it so much on the political stage in France? And what are the solutions? We talk about them before they're an ideological vector, and political debate is fed by ideology and not enough by pragmatism. We are very hypocritical about it because the debate that we keep bringing up is, or the reports of Piketty that you mentioned, is the business as usual, because it's not about knowing what is the gap between the most poor and the most rich person, is how do we do to make sure that the average, the middle class, doesn't lag behind. Because this is the paradox that we have right now. Never before the feeling of inequalities has been so big by the population, among the French population, because they're repeated about it all day long. And the country has never been so generous, socially speaking. And the second paradox here is that the French have never had such a feeling of feeling losing ground in their wages, and yet they haven't been so well equipped, particularly if you compare to what we had 30 years ago. What do you mean by equipment? You mean, yes, housing, appliances, spending power to go on vacation. So what comes out of it? What is it? If I was to summarize it, I would take the famous sentence from Sylvain Tesson, France is a paradise where the residents believe that they're in hell. The real paradox is not in France, it's not even in the Western world. The real hell are in the countries that have absolutely no regulation, very little system, social system, and they live like everything can explode every day. And the biggest inequalities in terms of health, in terms of housing, in terms of gender-based violence, working conditions, and none of the countries that I describe are in the Western world, and particularly not France. So what am I telling you on that? Because I think that we have a huge subject here, which is to find the answer and to stop always repeating the same narrative on the gap in the inequalities and the wages, where the only solution would be to raise more taxes on the rich that are stigmatized as the bad guys. First of all, it's not the case. And maybe the more modest one could help them out too. So what are the solutions? The real solution, the first solution is to say the truth and to say we cannot put a liter and a half of water in a 1 liter bottle. So if we want to have more money, make more money, we have to work more, and we need to incentive more the additional half day of work in the week. So the real inequalities are in education. They are coming from the social background that you come from, and that applies to to all the world. And if the one field where we need to work more in France is to reduce inequalities, is the fact that a number of social backgrounds have children who are born with less chances, less opportunities than others in different social backgrounds, because they're more going to be tempted to go on social media, they're going to more be tempted to use drugs in those difficult neighborhoods, in those underprivileged neighborhoods. The other inequality is the territorial inequality. It's not the same than a high-end neighborhood or difficult suburbs like the city which I administer, which is the city of Meaux. And we see that there's a real divide there between all these various neighborhoods. And third point is all of that generates a structural doubt and a very severe doubt on which is the real time bomb, which is the doubt on the efficiency of a democracy. So for the last few years, we keep hearing that democracy is not that great, it's not that efficient, I don't make more than I do now than before. So maybe it's all about the democracy, all these leaders are not very efficient. Maybe a good dictator would serve us right. So maybe we may lose a bit of freedom here and there, but maybe they're going to do the job, So how can we, in our democracy, to remind people that we can be efficient within the boundaries of the democracy? And that's a challenge that we need to address, and I'm talking about France, and I'm talking about the Western leaders. We need to give a different narrative than the one that is provided by a number of Western leaders that embody mediocrity. We have a feeling that we have inequalities of power. We have such a high concentration of richness on top of the pyramid that the people who have these fortunes have their voice matter. If it was true, we would have 60% of public spending on GDP and 50% of obligatory taxes on the. What I mean is that it's not the topic. The topic is how can we measure the efficiency of public spending. Unfortunately, today we spend more and more, and yet it doesn't seem to improve the quality of social services. So it's not just about rising the spending and rising the taxes. But I know it's a debate that I'm not going to win you over on. We both have our ideas, but we need to both understand that what is at stake today is the fact that the 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 middle class is lagging behind, and yet they carry the dynamic of the country. And there's too many public spending leads to general frustration, and that's what we're going to have to solve. I turn to you, Heikki, HIILAMO. You are a disciple. I don't know if I could call you a disciple, but you have been inspired by the works of Tony Atkinson. Tony Atkinson is the professor of economics of the London School of Economics, University of Oxford, who inspired the works of Thomas Piketty, and that started giving the idea to Thomas Piketty to start working on portfolios and legacy. And you followed one of the leads of Tony Atkinson, which is to put in place universal income to reduce inequalities. I would like to have your opinion on the statement that both the first speakers made. Are you sharing their views, or do you have a different view on it?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation for this panel. I think this panel is a very fruitful one, since I think the debate on inequality is somehow misguided. It seems that inequality is the kind of solution to everything which is going wrong in the world. So if we just fix inequality, then everything will improve. And over here, the key question is whether inequality is cause or a consequence of social ills. So if it's a cause of social ills, then if we reduce inequality, the society will be much better. But if it's just a consequence of social ills, then reduction of inequality might not result in nothing more than reduction in inequality. I tend to disagree with my previous speakers, since I think inequality, and I'm talking about inequality in terms of income inequality and wealth inequality. I'd like to think inequality in terms of body temperature, the human body temperature. So if the temperature is high, then there's something wrong with your body. But the thing is that it's just a symptom of an illness, most often an inflammation in some part of your body. And if you just deal with the consequence, it's not gonna cure your illness. So my opinion is that inequality is mostly a consequence of social problems. So it's a consequence of lack of education. It's a consequence of Sorry. Okay, so it's a consequence of lack of employment opportunities, lack of health care. There are also some other factors, like which was referred to previously, like monopolistic market structures, etc. And over here, I think it's very essential to think about which social ills are behind the rise in inequality. And since tackling those things will actually result in improvements. So what I'm not saying that we should not have social protection measures or any other income transfers. They're very important. Generous social protection measures, they help people to recover from social risks like losing a job or getting sick. But very good unemployment insurance doesn't actually create jobs, or a sickness benefit doesn't actually cure illness. So we need to have other policies in place as well. So we talk about taxes as well, I think progressive taxes which reducing inequality are important, and of course you need to have good public institutions to fight against the root causes of inequality. But I think that the taxes, they are not so important as such. It's also important how the tax money is spent. So if that money is spent on quality education, which was mentioned earlier, or on good social protection programs, that will actually deal with the root causes of inequality. So my main point is that inequality as such is it's only a kind of a symptom of things going wrong in a society. It's not the root cause. And then also final point is that when we talk about why this debate is somehow misguided is that we have to make a distinction between equality as a kind of a moral imperative or a moral goal. It's very much ingrained in the thinking in France in liberté, égalité, fraternité, and it's very much implemented in Finland. So people think that it's fair. We must have a fair society, and it's important goal as such. But then another issue is to think about what are the root causes of inequality and how we could deal with the root causes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are going to...
Sorry, I was speaking English, it's continuing in English, so we decided we're going to moderate in French, so I apologize for that. Ndidi, NWUNELI, you are looking everything from Washington on these policies to fight against inequalities and against poverty. Which ones are the most efficient? We can see that fighting against inequalities have a hard time being promoted because we have a hard time, agreeing on the definition. Isn't it better to fight against poverty? And what do you do about that within your NGO One campaign?
Opportunity to engage, and I applaud the comments that have been made before me. So the One campaign has actually been founded on this premise that none of us are equal until all of us are equal, and that where you're born should not determine whether you live. And Bono, Bobby Shriver, and Jamie Drummond, three individuals from very diverse walks of life, saw what was happening in another region of the world and felt this is unacceptable. How can we live with ourselves and this is happening? And so that is what pushed their work. And we've actually, as a globe, can celebrate a lot of wins. Poverty has been cut in half in the last 20 years. Those who die of childbirth has been cut in half. Children are living more past their 5th birthday, more than ever before. And that's because of the work that many of us in this room and many of you have done. So I think as a world, we should be proud of the progress we've made. But there's still inequity. And what is driving some of this inequity? One campaign has great data, and I just want to share some of the data with you about where the inequity still remains and why it remains. And part of it is conflict. In fact, when we think about where some of the inequity resides at the moment, we see that 2/3 of the world's extreme poor live in countries characterized by fragility, conflict, and violence. 421 million people live in extreme poverty in these countries. And conflict is something we recognize as an issue. However, what is driving this inequity in these countries? Number one is structural barriers. At the One campaign, we've taken on the issue of debt. We have 20 countries at the brink of debt distress. Why? Because of the cost of debt. We actually have data that shows that many of these countries pay 500% more than their counterparts in Europe. And many of these countries are paying more to Europe than is coming into their countries. In fact, in Africa, which is a continent that's most affected by this, we've calculated that even in the private sector, when we take debt from Europe, we're paying 500% more than our counterparts because of this risk premium, a perceived risk of investing in a country, linked to negative perceptions, linked to our views of this world region, and many of these perceptions are unfounded. They're not based on data, they're based on bias, they're based on preconceived notions. organization called Africa No Filter calculated the cost of negative reporting on elections in Africa is $4.2 billion. So it directly affects investment flows. And so when we think about dismantling some of these infrastructural barriers or these structural barriers at the One campaign and unlocking fair capital, we think about a few issues and a few potential steps. The first one is changing the narrative. When we think about investing in the lives of others, is it a cost or is it a benefit? What is the return on investment for investing in the lives of others? At the One campaign, we've been fighting for Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, and the Global Fund. And we've clearly shown that $1 invested in Gavi results in, some people say 20 times. There's data that shows 50 times returns. There's no better investment. And oftentimes we say, well, I can vaccinate my children in France, but I don't care about other world regions. Why is it my business? France gives less than 0.4% or 5% of GDP to any other parts of the world and has cut its investment by 40%. When we ask the average European, do you feel good that your country gives a small 0.4% to another to save a life? Everybody says, I feel good about it. It makes me feel like a hero. I'm helping other world regions. We have an office in France and great young people who fight for this cause. And we're proud of French people who believe that their country should help other world regions. And that a small investment, a €1, less than €1, in fact, it's maybe 40 cents. Is it cents we say here? Cents? Should be used to save another life. So change that narrative. Show the return on investment. That we're more connected than we think. COVID-19 showed us we're connected, but we forgot very quickly how connected we were. So how do we reframe that? That's the first step. The second is the important role of data. And we've talked about data here, and I think that this social media makes everybody feel poor. I think a lot of young people here feel the pressure of the better life that other people are living. There was a very great wedding in Venice, and everybody said, I want to have that wedding. I saw many young girls dreaming about that wedding. No, not in this room. So now the standards are higher and higher about what wealth looks like and my expectation of wealth. And that is unacceptable. And I think it's important that we reframe what wealth is. And wealth is, social capital is more than, it's social capital, it's relationships, it's values. And that reframing is important. We just released a very good report, and I recommend that all of you visit our One Data portal that says, from scarcity to security. And when we're defining security at One, it's not about defense. That's just one part of it. Security is health security. Security is social contracts, social security. Security is well-being, it's nutrition security. And we have to reframe what we mean by security. And that's where changing narratives and data has an important role to play. And finally, we have to hold governments accountable. We have to. We as citizens of the world cannot leave our governments to abdicate the responsibilities they have to serve as good neighbors. France has benefited a lot from many of the Francophone countries in Africa. We see France as a very good partner. France cannot abdicate its responsibility to the Global Fund, to Gavi, and to key organizations that play an important role in uniting us. France cannot abdicate its responsibilities to the African Development Fund, which will enable us to grow our economies. Africa does not need charity, Africa needs investment. And at the One campaign, we believe in a pathway to sustainability, where we see European investors working alongside us, offering financing that is fair, that is priced appropriately, and that ensures a pathway to sustainability, so that we're not dependent on any other world region. We have a vision that African countries will grow their economies, and we have the commitment of many partners on the continent to ensure that we get to a stage where we're not dependent. For me, I'm committed to ensuring that we come on these platforms in future years and talk about the success stories of what we've done together, because we changed narratives, because we took responsibility, because we committed to solidarity, and because we made a personal commitment to see each other as neighbors, as peers, and as partners. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. So we've understood that there is this question of inequality between the North and the South. But within African countries, are there also inequalities which are ill-perceived by people, or is that not part of the political debate?
It's part of the political debate. And the same expectations we have of other nations we expect in our own. And the domestic taxes, the recovery of taxes, the return of illicit financial flows, right? The evasion of taxes are all key parts of what we take on at the One campaign. So it's definitely transparency and accountability and data that informs data-driven policy making, but also enables civil society to hold governments and the wealthy accountable, because we're complicit on all sides.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Trisha, we haven't really talked very much about inequalities between sexes, the genders, but we see these gender differences in all countries. There is progress being made, but we do see that even in European society, here in France, even as soon as the pressure is raised and we backtrack, and there are inequalities in terms of education, which are very important for the future, for revenue and heritage. So with SheSays, what do you do? Thank you very much. It's we're always talking about a time bomb here, but the bomb is already here. It's not a time bomb. It's going to go off now. If I could simplify all this, I would say
crisis, c'est là, le bomb. Education, quality education.
Quality education is there.
The job economy, it's already here. And the matrix of it all, the loss of faith in multilateral systems, the loss of faith in international institutions, the decline of democracy that we're seeing world over, that's also already here. So je trouve c'est vraiment inutile de dire c'est une...
It's pointless saying it's a time bomb. No. I don't agree with what Philippe said about the inequalities over recent years. If we take a look at the statistics,
we do not have access to transparent data. Countries are not giving you access to transparent data. That's one. If you just talk about the report of Thomas Pegetti and the World Inequality Lab, based on 2022 and 2023, the top 1% in India has an income share that encompasses 22.6% of the entire country and a wealth share of 40.1% of the entire country. That is the data. So yes, our GDP is doing very well, entre guillemets, but guess whose pocket it is going into? We have a 900 million population of people that are eligible to work in. You have to understand these numbers, right? 900 million. The truth is, India is not looked at as a democracy with citizens qui a le droit de l'accès pour le droit.
Who have the right to work.
The West to tap into. Right? That's the first truth. That's one of the crises we should talk about. So out of the 900 employed people, 100 million educated women are no more even looking for jobs anymore. That is the lived reality of the situation we are living in. These are educated women who are not looking for jobs anymore. So, and Monsieur Jean-François, je suis d'accord avec vous.
Jean-François, I agree with some of the things you've said, but I'm not in agreement about what you said about inequality if you're only talking about women.
Women in France will get raped. 1 out of every 8 women in France will get raped. So this concept of inequality is unfortunately touching us all, and I think this is where we can find a lot of solidarity. For me, the true crisis, and of course we'll get to solutions later, but I think it's important to pin the tail of the donkey. And the true crisis is that if you are not the right color, if you don't speak the right language, if you don't have the right passport, your inequality will not be looked at as seriously as the others. Our numbers don't match. Because if we're still debating about a bomb and retardement, je suis désolée, mais on ne parle pas de Soudan. Right now, the world's largest humanitarian crisis is underway in Sudan. It has entered its 3rd year of conflict. 6 million women and children have been directly displaced. 12 million people are directly affected by gender-based violence in Sudan. 12 million people. If we talk about Gaza, the genocide that's currently underway in Gaza, UN experts have said, end the unfolding genocide or watch it end life in Gaza. And what does that mean when we talk about watch it end life? 52,535 deaths, out of which 70% were women and children, and this is as of 18th March 2025, and there have been more deaths, unfortunately, since then. So what we're seeing time and again is when we talk about the global crisis, unfortunately, it has to reach the European Union, it has to reach le territoire des États-Unis. Pour vous comprendre, en fait, il y a un problème qu'il faut qu'on adresse.
For you to realize that there's a problem. The problem is already here, but the solution is already here also. Thank you. I would like Ndidi to take the floor again. There's a question we've all been wondering about, and this is budgetary inabilities to reduce inequalities. We see that budgets are being questioned everywhere because all of the developed countries are now in debt. Also, there's a change of policy in the States, and also we see there a change of policy in big philanthropic organizations as well. So what can you do about all of that? How can we act?
Yeah, so I'm just coming from Seville, where we had the Financing for Development Summit, and that was the first question on the table. It's a new reality. And I love a quote from one of the speakers at Seville who said, "The barn has burnt down, so now I can see the stars." And I think that is the crisis we're in, but it allows us to see clearly that the US has abdicated leadership at the moment. And it is time for Europe, it is time for Africa, it's time for Asia to step in and fill the leadership vacuum. As someone who is both American and Nigerian, I never thought in my lifetime I'd be saying this, but I think it is the reality. So that's the first recognition. Nobody is going to save us. Somebody else said, Father Christmas used to come. There's no Father Christmas anymore. It's taken significant amounts of money out of the development landscape. But it doesn't mean we've stopped fighting, right? At the One campaign, we're still fighting because we expect that everywhere there are cuts, citizens will rise up and demand that there's a reallocation because citizens care. They really do care about each other. I think the narrative that citizens don't care, I think is false because when we have actually polled them, in the UK where we've seen cuts, in the US where we've seen cuts, citizens say, I care about how my country shows up in the world. I want to be proud of my country. So we will continue to rise up. That's the first thing. The second thing is we need new forms of capital. The concept of my country first and then you second is not going to work. It has to be mutually beneficial relationships based on trust, and we have to rebuild that trust, based on transparent and accountable partnerships, where funding is flowing where it's needed and it's priced fairly. At the One campaign, we're excited because Africa is hosting the G20 for the first time, and South Africa is hosting. And we've taken on this cost of capital as a critical issue and the debt issue as critical. Debt is not bad, but if it's priced unfairly, it is crippling. If countries are paying out more than what is coming in, that's unacceptable, and we have to remove the structural barriers. We need data, we need to take on the credit rating agencies, we need governments and bond markets to pay fair, and we need to shift financing. And then the final thing, and I know that migration is still an issue in France, and it is an issue across the world, and she alluded to it. We have to see the workforce of the future coming from Africa and Asia, because we have so much to contribute. It is not a bad thing when you have equipped a workforce with talent, with creativity, and you have to pay them fairly. We're seeing that this bias against the workforce is unacceptable. When you go to Senegal, you see French workers. They are treated as superiors, which is unacceptable, right? But here, when we have Senegalese workers, they are treated as inferiors. We need to stop that. So from where I sit, I think there's a need for us to reset our view of migration, and Africa will play its role in equipping the workforce for the future, starting with health, right? We believe we can produce the doctors, the nurses, the care workers that are world-class for future. And I think we need to start thinking about critical minerals as a sector of growth. Ag and food, Africa can feed itself and the world. How do we unlock that? So as we think about critical sectors and the right financing, we then see ourselves as equal. Our vision at One is that Africa is an equal player, and that's what we work on to push every day. changing the barriers, removing the barriers, but also uplifting people so that France can rise, Nigeria can rise, Senegal can rise, and together we're stronger as a world.
Jean-François COPÉ.
Well, first of all, I think these changes are really interesting, and our discussions identify the differences that can make us see things differently. I just want to make a couple of comments about what I've heard. The first pertains to Africa, because obviously I was listening to you. This is a subject that I am very familiar with, as is the case for other French politicians. I just want to say something. In general, Europe in general and France in particular has nothing to blush about when talking about the work it's carrying out in partnerships with Africa, particularly French-speaking Africa, in economy, in culture, in security. A lot of outstanding work has been carried out. And in your analysis, there's one thing which I believe you didn't underline enough. It's for two states to work together, the French state and an African state, because we're not talking about Africa in general, we're talking about an African state. You have to have some interlocutors, you have to have individuals with whom you can talk. However, when on the other side of the table, you've got leaders who don't want to speak to you because they are instrumentalizing the relationship they have with you for internal political ends. And when they smile to the sirens of external forces, of Wagner militia forces, for example, or the behaviors of other countries such as China, then we're not playing on a level field there. The time comes when France, which is not a superpower, it doesn't have the resources or the objective motivation to want to exchange with people who don't want to listen to them. And that's an important message. I want to say that France's commitment to security with sub-Saharan Africa to combat Islam terrorism and all violence done to women, France's commitment has been absolutely outstanding and has translated into a very humiliating turn of situation for us, to the point where some of us are saying, well, because the African states in question think that they can do things better with other parties, well, we can let them get along with Wagner. Just let them get on with it. Because constantly we cannot be humiliated and made to feel so guilty. We want to deploy these efforts with our resources. And yes, we may be clumsy sometimes. But the second point I wanted to bring home, and this is for you because I was listening to you, of course, very carefully. And I would like to commend what a great presentation you made. However, how do we measure inequality? It's the way in which a state combats those inequalities. And I'm sorry to say this, but in a democracy, we fight inequality better than under any other type of regime. And I'm so convinced of this because the violence against women you're talking about, it just so happens that I am first in line for combating this subject. I've worked hard on this subject. Getting equal number of men and women on boards and banning the burqa garment. What I'm wanting to say is that here in France, and this is the difference with many other countries which are not democratic, here in France we deploy huge resources to make sure that we cover all bases so that this victimization narrative cannot be heard. Yes, of course there's violence and we are fighting that violence, and France is not indifferent as others may be. We are not indifferent because these are our values. I think we have to get that message hammered home. So you can't put all countries on the same level. We all have different cultures. There's no moral judgment here. I don't like that European Western approach which says that others are all daft, they haven't understood anything because we are the Democrats. Even I've arrived at a time in my life where I think we should stop asking non-democratic countries to become democratic. Everyone has their own choices to make. But on these subjects, we do the best we possibly can, and we have put in amazingly brave measures. And my final comment, when I first started speaking, I said that the drama we're going through today is that there are more and more people in democracies which are calling democracy into question, wondering whether it really is the right regime. The real danger is in our Western countries to have populist, extremist leaders who are trying to nourish some kind of electoral success by talking about these combats which should be against discrimination against minorities. And just believe, I am not woke, I am not a woke bloke, but I think it's the other side of extremism which we have to combat similarly. But for heaven's sake, stop comparing those democratic countries who do the best they can with those other countries who are just feeding off the back of these inequalities to protect values which are not shared by Europe and the Western world. Heikki, did you want to react to that?
Express my admiration for your very passionate and accurate analysis of how things are in the world. And it definitely looks pretty bad. But what I would like to emphasize is that if we take a long-term view, things look a bit different. I'll just give you two examples. One is that just 100 years ago, Finland had the bloodiest civil war in Europe, and now we have been the happiest country in the world for 8 years in a row. Another example is China. When I was born, tens of millions Chinese people died of hunger. There was probably the first famine in the world, the Mao's Great Famine, and now look what has happened in China. And I think, well, just commenting on your remarks on democracy, I think we are probably too sure of ourselves if we just look at what has going on in China. They also have been able to keep inequality at bay, although they have had a remarkable economic growth which has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. So it's just a remarkable achievement, and I think we have to take that for what it is and think how we could do better. So our democracy is not worth the admiration and the passion for democracy if we can't deliver better results. If there is a regime which is not a democratic and is way more efficient than ours, then we have to think about that. Another notion is just comment on you concerning the development financing and investing and all that, what's happening at the state level, global level. I've been working on climate change adaptation in the southern part of Madagascar, which used to be the French colony. And it was declared by UN as the first climate change-induced famine area a few years ago. And we were studying so-called asset-based community development, where people are just working with the assets they have. There are very few international organizations, and the state is a very weak actor, so you just have to work what you have. It's mostly religious communities which are teaching people to drill wells and to plant trees and to adapt new farming techniques. So that's something what's happening on the grassroots. We should not ignore that, and we should not be discouraged on what's going on. I mean, it's such a terrible tragedy which is going, for example, in the US development finance. But there are other things, positive things going on the ground.
It's true, we've not really talked about inequalities linked to climate change, and those inequalities will be quite strong. So throughout the debate, we have occasionally moved away from the economic aspect. So Philippe, do you want to guide us back onto the straight and narrow? I just want to come back on what has been saying about, I would like to underline this recent period, the data is not very robust. Some data comes from NGOs, which suggests that there's an increase in inequalities. But we must take these figures with a big pinch of salt. They're not very robust. We don't have precise figures. We really need precise figures. I think, from what I've heard, that yes, there are some points where we must be objective, we must be very prudent also when we're talking about inequalities. The second thing is that we are in systems, political, social systems, which are relatively generous in the West, and tax is not always the right way of reducing inequality. Sometimes it can even reduce inequalities, but it can render the poorest even poorer. So we must be very careful. And we also see the role of education, the role of regions. How can we make sure that whether the north or the south or the east or the west, they're not different? And a lot of the debate was dedicated to security, not only making sure that there are policemen on the street so people don't snatch a handbag, but security for women. That's another dimension of inequality. If you go home and you're not sure that you're not about to be raped, then that means that there is a basic inequality which is experienced as a loss of well-being. And several score points are removed there. And so we need to fight for that. And the final point, and this is as far as an economist can go, when we're talking about democratic and non-democratic economies, I can say that liberal institutions and democratic institutions are key because of the critical power that they give, and because of the data, and because they also are the basis on which we can carry out a combat against inequality. Because you've mentioned quite a few countries, the combat against inequalities is very difficult. And there are so many inequalities around because everything is being masked. Because of the narrative. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you for your contributions. We may have the time for just a quick question, a very, very quick question. Hello. Thank you very much. My name is Robin. I'm a student in Grenoble and I'd like to be a journalist. Here we are fortunate every morning to have the Hebra group handing out the newspapers and other press partners handing out their newspapers. We've got Jean-François who has talked about newspapers, and it reminds me of something which speaks volumes to our youth, and that is it's a survey which says, would you agree to curb access to aircraft? People say no. If you say, would you be prepared to curb the number of flights and ban private jets? People say yes. And in France today, we are privatizing water. There's a lot of inequalities, even in this country, pertaining to climate change and access to water. Water is going to become very rare, and that really does worry me. Would anyone like to react to that? Yep, I'd like to step up to the plate. This is your political party's opportunity to talk about its manifesto. Yeah, sustainable development is a huge subject. Now I would say for 15 years now, we are starting to have a little bit of experience on how to broach these problems. One has to start by saying by listing all of the positive things which have been done to protect our planet in Europe and in France. The big mistake that politicians are making is to make people feel guilty, because it makes them feel powerless to contribute to saving the planet. And so it shifts the debate. It's not a question of how many times you take a plane. It's more about knowing whether in all areas of life, if you can be more ecological. For example, today in France, we are one of the countries that sorts its waste best in the world. We've got the cleanest water in the world. We're one of the countries in the world with the most eco-responsible agriculture, despite anything else you might hear in the news. And so in terms of energy, we have managed to get a good energy mix. So let's stop characterizing things. The subject is not private jets. The subject is, can we have clean aircraft with clean jet fuel? And technology will make this possible. That's the challenge, to try and look at things in a more general manner, and to have public policy which is responsible, where we're not making people feel guilty, where we are including people and making people trustful and confident. Earlier on, I heard an exchange about dictatorship. By definition, you are not free to criticize what is said, whereas in a democracy, you do have that right. And the role of a politician is to be positive about policy, not constantly to be making people feel anxious. And there, I think we've got a huge challenge to rise to. I'm sure we could have a second round table on that subject. However, we have been told that the time is up. Philippe, you can wrap this up for us. Okay, the final word. Yes, there are inequalities. We have to be careful. There are different types of inequalities, of course. There are some which require rapid action. The question of that time bomb, I think inequalities, those that are most problematic are not time bombs, they are current issues that we have to combat. And I think all of them are things which we might tend to neglect and which we have to bring back centre stage. Particularly the question of the safety of women, because if someone is not feeling safe, they can't enjoy life to the full. Thank you very much, everybody.